Welcome to the Merly End. I'm Dominic Machado, and today I'm joined by two esteemed guests, Estelle Vasudevan from Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's number one cricket and all-form journalist, and my cousin, Mark Machado, from across the pond, also known as Uncle Mark. If you're giving us a listen, please like, subscribe, follow on whatever you're listening on. We keep on doing these podcasts on a weekly basis. Sorry that we didn't get to a live this week, but we will be back with a live for next week, and we'll follow up with some prompts for you to send in some questions and some thoughts. Okay, but the big thing that's actually happening is we had Sri Lanka actually play some real cricket, which is something we haven't had for a couple months now. So the Sri Lankan women finished their 3-game ODI series against the New Zealand women. The first game was rained off, and then the last 2 games resulted in fairly resounding losses for Sri Lanka. And it's an interesting series. New Zealand wasn't playing a full-strength side. Sri Lanka blooded a lot of very young players, both due to injury and performance. And so there's a lot to talk about. But the thing that I want to kind of start with is what's made Sri Lanka a formidable one-day side has been that over the past 2.5 years, Chamari has had an absolutely historic run as an ODI batter, planting herself at number one on the charts, leading 300-plus chases. But she did not look to be in good form and has not been in good form since basically the Asia Cup of last year. So, Estelle, I'm coming to you. To what extent is Chamari's form a concern to you?
I think it's a massive concern, right? As you mentioned, we really haven't seen much from her with the bat since that Asia Cup victory last, was it June or July? So it's been a
Mm-hmm.
long time, and you've had like a couple of bilaterals go by. You've had the World Cup, obviously T20 World Cup, but it feels like she's struggling to. It looks like she's timing the ball, right? When she does hit it, she's timing the ball, but she just can't seem to get any consistency or any rhythm in her batting. I think it's a massive concern. And I mean, I was talking to Mark about this off air about like, last year when Sri Lanka won the Asia Cup, everyone was talking, we were talking about, okay, Atapattu doesn't have to do it alone now. She's got other people around her. I mean, there were people talking about how, there are girls who uh, are so good that you don't even need Atapattu anymore. But now it brings that into question, right?
Yeah.
Because suddenly, with her out of form, Sri Lanka is struggling. They lost to Ireland in Ireland. They did terribly in the World Cup, and now they've had basically a whitewash in this series against New Zealand. So I think it'll be a massive concern. It also goes to show the kind of you know what a talismanic and important figure she is, right? Because she's been carrying the team for so long, and it
Mm.
became such a norm that there were people who were saying, okay, you know what, she can retire now. We've got the team that can take Sri Lanka forward. Obviously, you've still got a couple of players who've done well and who did reasonably well in this series, but you still need Chamari, and that's why she's rated so highly around the world,
Mm.
because she has such a massive impact and she's so important to the side.
Yeah, I think two things. I think you use the absolute correct word, talisman or taliswoman, whatever we want to call it, is the perfect term because when she plays well, she also lifts the game of the other players. It's not just she's a superstar doing everything on her own, but you see the confidence that she imbues in those other players when she's performing at that sort of top level. And the other thing is, I think a lot of times we look at stats and we use them to evaluate players and we say, oh, this is a good player, this is a very good player. Stats absolutely underrate how important Chamri is to the team. And I think the biggest thing we can say is she is their match winner. She is the one, regardless of the circumstances, who can win a match for that team in any conditions, any circumstances. And that's what they need from her. Mark, what are your thoughts on Chamari's form? Are you concerned, or do you blame it on, well, maybe they haven't really been playing too much international cricket over the last few months, even though Chamari has been um, in the BBL, the women's BBL, and the New Zealand T20 league.
Yeah, I'm concerned. When we were getting ready for this show, as Estelle mentioned, me and Estelle were talking about it. I mean, for me, Chamari is kind of like, she's like the first Avenger, isn't it? She's Captain Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
I was mentioning how she is a superstar on the island. She's on billboards all over the place, but it feels like teams are now aware that there is a possibility they can lose to us, and they're doing the homework and trying to figure out how to get her out. We've got to kind of move beyond that, right? So it's not so much that Chamari is necessarily got worse as a player, but more that players are getting teams are getting a bit more sophisticated when we approach them. This happens to a lot of players, right? So you see it at the back end of Adam Gilchrist's career. Remember when he famously had to illegally win a World Cup by holding a squash ball in his hand, and now we see it with Virat Kohli, right? And the way his shot selection has changed as well over the years, and he's not doing things that he might have been fruitful earlier on in his career. So I think this is and actually, the other thing I should say, this is something that's happening in women's sports more broadly, because as sports gets professionalized and more money comes into it, there's more data and there's more information, there's more people talking about things, sports evolve, right? So I think maybe SLC or somebody around Chamari needs to kind of sit down and go, right, this is how we're getting out. This is what teams are doing. How do we combat that? Because I think it's not, she's at a stage in her career now where it's not just good enough to be the fittest person on the pitch, the quickest person on the pitch, the strongest person on the pitch, the most talented person on the pitch. Teams are able to kind of able to combat that with just by looking at the data and having a plan to deal with her. So we need to, and I say we, I mean Sri Lankan cricket needs to kind of work out, right, what our team's going to do and try and second and third guess where her weaknesses are and what they might do, how they're trying to set her up to get out. I think she's been caught the last 6 times in ODI cricket. So Chamari, Sri Lankan women's cricket is built upon her shoulders, and now it's the moment in her career where the system needs to come in and raise her up again, and not again for the first time, right? Because how many times has she saved us and dug us out of holes and been like the only performance that's put in and made, one game she shouldn't have won, one tournaments that we shouldn't have won, one series we shouldn't have won. And, at points in her career, she's taken scores where we've got no one else in the team has done absolutely anything and made a loss kind of somewhat respectable, right? But now's the time when they need to, I don't know the inner workings of the so-called brain center. I don't know how the data analysts work in the actual day-to-day on it. I don't know if the women's team have a data analyst. I don't know who's collecting data for them, but they need to kind of shift resources and help her out to get out of this hole. Because on the surface of it, you can say it's just form, but actually you need to, and you can say players come in and out of form, but actually at the top level of cricket, which we expect Sri Lankan women to be at, like we do the men's side, there's got to be more than that, right? You've got to think a little bit deeper than it.
Yeah, two things about that. Like, one thing is, as well as helping her, it's also about building everyone around her, right? And I think if you look at this series, there's one thing you can say is there's still a severe lack of depth, because you're bringing in, remember, Manudi Nanakara makes it into this team. She's 17, 18 years old, right?
Just turned 17.
Just turned 17, right? So Harshita Samaravikrama is 20, 26, 27. So between that 27-year-old and the 17-year-old, there is a gap of like no players, like maybe 1 or 2 players, which is basically like a lost generation of cricketers, right? So I think that's also an important factor. The second thing is, I wonder how much of this form factor is actually mental, Because
Hmm.
Dom, I think you made a really valid point in that when she makes runs, she lifts the team, right? And that is clearly confidence. No, it's not ability, because it's the same players who are involved when she's not in form and when she's in form. But when she makes runs, there is this shift in, attitude within the team that pushes them, beyond what they do when she's not
Hmm.
performing well. And even for her, I remember I did an interview with her last year or year before last, for Crick Buzz, where she spoke about, how she'd had a real, like, she didn't do much for her WBBL teams, right, in the first few seasons that she played, and she didn't really get picked up that much. Then she gets picked as a replacement player for Sydney Thunder, and she told me how the coach asked her, what is it about the Sri Lankan team that helps you perform and that like motivates you to perform? And her answer was that like they depend on me and there's pressure on
Hmm.
me. So sometimes I guess that's also a factor, right? Like after the Asia Cup, with all the chat about, look, there Harshita can take over, Vishmi can take over, Kavisha can take over. Whether she also or took her foot off the
Hmm.
pedal a little bit, in that, I can relax now because
Yeah.
I've got players who can take this weight. But at the end of the day, Harshita is a good player, Vishmi is a good player, Kavisha is a really good player, but none of them are Chamari Atapattu, right?
Hmm.
Chamari
Hmm.
Atapattu is, I think, a generational talent. Particularly in women's cricket, if you look globally, you don't get players who can hit the ball like she can hit the ball, right? So I wonder how much of it is mental as well, and whether there is support on that side,
Hmm.
to kind of identify these areas that, look, there's support needed in this sort of way as well, not just, why isn't she in form? She's hitting the ball well in the nets. What's going wrong?
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Um, Chamri is best when Chamri is sort of um, I think of the Asia Cup final, how upset she was when she got
Yeah.
out because she said, I'm the one who's going to have to beat India. I'm the one who's going to have to score 100 to win this match. Excuse me. It didn't end up being that case, but that's how she played. That was the what drove her, and that's what lifts her teammates. And I think it might be interesting to see if this tri series that's coming up with India,
Mm.
right, may actually be a starting point, because we've seen how the Indian women are playing in one day cricket, and they are playing absolutely out of this world. And basically, the only way that Sri Lanka could challenge them is if Chamri goes berserk, right? That's what I'm thinking. So I wonder if that might be a place to kick her into gear. And I think your point about Harshita is a really good one. She played well. She looked really, really good in this series. She scored runs in pretty much every match, but that's the difference between Chamari and
Yeah.
Harshita. Harshita is a good player, but she's not a match winner just yet. That's not quite, and she's not quite on the level of Chamri yet. We don't want to put any limits on
Yeah.
how good she'll be, but that's really, really important. Now, the thing I want to kind of turn to, and this is another point you brought up, Estelle, the sort of lost generation between Harshita and Manudi here. We had a few players from that middle generation kind of make, if not a debut, a sort of opening statement, right? So we had Amisha Dulani come in for Manudi after Manudi had those kind of two very big struggles, right? And we also had Jitana Vimukti, right, the all-rounder, come in and, or really bowler first, come in and ply her trade in the absence of Udeshika Prabodhini. Mark and Estelle, what did you guys make of these sort of new talents who made their way into the squad? Obviously, the results weren't great, but what do you think they should do with them? Right, they've kind of blooded them now, given them an opportunity. What's the road ahead, and what do you see that you like in them?
I'll answer that quite broadly to begin with. In terms of, I think that we argue about how what is the gap between domestic cricket and kind of international cricket. I think
Hmm.
For the young Sri Lankan women who come into the side, I think the gap's absolutely massive. To be honest, I think there's a big jump in playing domestic cricket, or I don't think you can't really call it domestic women's calendar at the moment, but playing that is available to them, and then have to step into it. What is at this point now like almost a fully professional setup? I think is quite huge, right? I think that they need to basically SLC, and it kind of I think it kind of comes back to them. They've done a lot in the last few years, but there's still a long way to go. They need to put more domestic cricket in. They need to. I know they did this last year, so you know a lot of this stuff they just need to do more of. But they need to have more boil down the squad into possibles, probables, and future talents, and kind of just get them all mixing and playing as much as they can. They need to be more A-team fixtures or A-team tours away to places, even if that means going to Australia and just playing, good cricket sides, not the national side, but just playing against good cricket sides and surfaces, because that we need players in the women's setup who are used to being professional cricketers, who don't get overawed about going to New Zealand and suddenly playing in front of any sort of crowd, or I don't know these girls, right? I've never met them, right? But so I'm not saying this is the case, but it can be intimidating suddenly going from playing international to suddenly be thrown into playing international cricket, and you're playing a game that's in a time zone a million miles away from Sri Lanka that's been broadcast all around the world, and you're suddenly sitting there in the changing room with Chamari and Harshita and all these other women who've been doing it for years and years and years, and for the history of doing it. And I just think the step that we're asked them to make is massive. At some point in this, we're going to talk about the it's March Madness in Sri Lanka at the moment. We'll talk about the big match. There's a lot of positives and negatives about the big match, about the whole big match thing in Sri Lanka, but the big match cricket definitely gets young boys ready for the limelight of international cricket. We don't have that path for the women's team at the moment. The main kind of filter into the women's side is, have you done well at under 19s cricket, under 19s international cricket? That is a good indicator of whether or not someone has the talent to play at the top level. But it's still so far away from the level that we're expecting it. So, I mean, I remember when, to use an analogy with the men's side, I remember when Patam Nasanka stepped onto made his debut in the West Indies. I remember the first few balls, he looked like a total rabbit in the headlights. So I was like, why are people going on? Why is he so hyped up? And obviously, by backing him and giving him the right environment around it, he's come through, and he's able to his full range of talent is able to come through. And if we want our women's team to operate at the highest level and to go away and win tournaments and to be a major a team that other teams take seriously, then we've got to give the same opportunities to them as well. And I sometimes I watch both women and men make debuts for Sri Lanka. And I actually feel sorry for the players, because you can see in their body language they're tied up and they're worried about things, right?
They're scared. Get nervous. They're definitely scared. You can see the fear. Two quick things before I turn it over to you, Estelle. Chartha Solanka is another really good example. I remember his debut series in England. He looked total fish out of water. I thought this guy, they're hyping him up. The second thing that I'll add is, we had a viewer ask a question, I think a few weeks ago, about the possibility of Sri Lanka A tours for women, because one of the best things that SLC has done has been getting those under 19 tours, and it's gotten a lot of those girls a lot of exposure playing cricket at a high level for their age group. So now, as Estelle said, that lost generation, how do you create that transition from, okay, they clearly have talent, they can play with the best under 19 women in the world, but how do we prep them so that when they come into the national side, they're ready to make that leap again? And so, Estelle, I'll turn it over to you, but I just wanted to add those two things quickly.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely right. Like, I remember, again, to go back to a conversation I had with Shashikala Sirivardhan a couple of years ago, right? And she was saying that in 20 years, the amount of cricket she plays is almost equal to an Indian player who comes in at under 23 or under 25,
Mm.
because they play a lot more competitive cricket domestically there, right? And I think that is the kind of, that's one of the hurdles Sri Lanka has to overcome. We saw a lot of club cricket last year. We saw a lot of clubs, right, introduced SSC, NCC, all fielding teams. But I wonder how helpful that is, because you do want to not water down the talent also, right? Yes, you want to have as many clubs as possible,
Yeah.
but you don't want to make the same mistake you've made with the men's side of things, right? Where you have like 20 something clubs, and all your talent is diluted amongst those clubs. So there's a lot of work to be done in the domestic arena. Mark's point on the big matches, I think, is so true, right? um I think, I don't know if we want to transition to the big match stuff, right? But if any of the viewers heard of the Royal Tomin or watched the Royal Tomin this year, right?
Mm.
The amount of pressure those kids are under in that game, it's massive, right? It's not like just playing a school cricket game, because there's this weight of expectations on you and winning something. And St. Thomas has won this year seemingly
Mm.
from an almost unwinnable situation. That the guys who scored those runs on the last day, I mean, one thing is, all the fame, everything's going to come, right? But also imagine the amount of confidence you get from
Mm.
that. You're playing in front of a massive crowd. Remember, this is SSC, no stand, no, like, seating, so I don't know how many thousands of people were there,
Yeah.
but it is a massive crowd, and it's loud, and it's all like, basically there are no neutrals there, right? Everyone's baying for blood, kind of. So to perform in a situation like that, just going into this big match, I mean, I haven't followed a lot of schools cricket this season, because obviously I'm not working in that kind of area anymore. But what I've read is that St. Thomas's College did not have a good season, and their batting was a weakness right throughout the season, and they did not bat well in that first innings. But one thing that always comes out is, in these big matches, anything can happen, because it's about who handles
Mm.
pressure well, right? And I
Yeah.
think that is a massive area that you have to address with the men's and women's cricket, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not just about having the talent, it's about who can do well when the chips are against you, when it really matters. And y- I'm sure you guys would have seen like all these memes about the Australian team going into this Champions Trophy, where like everyone was saying, yeah, they don't have a bowling attack, but watch them make it to the semis or the finals,
Yeah.
because that championship mentality, and they've done it over and over again. It's about performing when it matters. And I
Mhm.
think that culture, I don't know, it's not going to happen overnight. The schools, that the cricket culture, I know there were plans of kind of funding big matches between schools, in girls schools in Sri Lanka would already have a leather ball team.
Mm.
There was a plan a few years ago. I don't know what's happening with that, but if that kind of culture can be created, for sure it builds here. Because you guys spoke about fear, right? And I think that's a major factor when you look at new players coming to Sri Lankan teams.
Mhm.
They look very timid. They look like, I don't know, like, should I own this space? That kind of
Yeah.
attitude, right? Kavisha is the only one like I can talk about, who from day one, I was there at her debut, she was
Yeah.
17 or 18. From day one, can you do an interview? Yes, I'll do an interview. Can I do
Yeah.
it in Sinhala? Yeah, that's fine, right? Who had that kind of, she had that
Mm.
confidence in herself. So that is an area that you need to build. And I think SLC is doing a few things on like personality and,
Mhm.
building that kind of side of things as well. But of course, there is a way, there's room to improve and a ways to go.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the point you made about being able to do it on the big stage, right? I think there was this question of how would Sri Lanka have done in the
Yeah.
Champions Trophy, and to me, the answer is sure, they have the talent to do very well in this particular format, but they haven't showed the ability to handle the pressure when the chips are down. And that's something that they've got to work on. And I think that question about younger players, the only other player I've seen kind of with that Kavisha energy from their debut is when Into Hasaranga on the men's side, right? Got that sort of on box office from day one. I'm
And
ready to go.
sadly, that's exactly what Sri Lankans don't like to see.
Yeah,
They don't
exactly.
like
Yeah,
guys who stand out like that.
that's exactly what I was going to say. That was the problem with his captaincy. He wasn't deferential enough. And it's kind of this,
Oh, there's one more player as well. Walala Gay has that energy as
yes,
well.
yes, he does.
Like
He
because
does.
he
That's true.
like turns up and he's like, right, I'm gonna
Yeah.
inject myself into every aspect of this game.
Yeah. And it's less about skill level than it is about mentality, right? Because everyone who makes it to that level has at least a requisite amount of skill
Yeah.
to be competitive. And I think one thing that's interesting is I wonder how much of it is the sort of you know the Ayamali culture, the Akinangi culture, right? Of someone's older, you show deference to them. So when you're a young person making your way into the team, you're taught to not take up space. You're taught to defer, right? And then when there's a 20-year age gap, right, between someone like Manuti Nanayakara and the older women in the team, and same thing on the men's side, right? It's almost like how do you act and how do you act take up in this space? So that there's a cultural element, I
Yeah.
think, too, to I've come here not because I'm supposed to defer to you. I've come here because I'm good at cricket and I want to show my skills on the field, right? That should be it. And I think of someone like Matisha Patirana and how different he is, say, like he's been good in Sri Lankan colors, but he hasn't been as good as he has been for CSK, I don't think. And I think that's because CSK has those resources to help the mental side of the game, right? To say this is what your role is, this is what you're going to do. How do we unlock you, right? You have a captain like Dhoni who is going to take care of you. Whereas I think that's something that we've got to work on. I think Chamari has done a really good job actually with the women's side with that, unlocking the potential of the Vishmis, of the Harsithas, of the Kavishas, letting them be their own people, right? Letting them express themselves and saying, you know what, you dropped a catch, that's okay. We're going to back you no matter what. And this is we'll transition over to some of the big match stuff in a second, but I think one of the tricky parts is the women's team is in a bit of transition. We have this World Cup and we want to kind of peak for the World Cup, but there's also some players who are coming to the end of their career who might be coming in and out of form, right? Whose value to the team is maybe questionable. And so then the question is, do you blood these youngsters who you know are going to take some time to come good, right? And being willing to stick with them, or are you going to kind of ride it out and roll the dice one last time for 2025? So I think there's a bit of there's a tension between where they want to be at the end of 2025 and what's good for the team in the long term.
Yeah.
So I think that's a tricky part, right? Trying to because I absolutely think they should blood those young women and get them playing, but that may mean giving up the hope that 2025 is going to be the year that you do something big on the World Cup stage. So that's
just one thing about it, and about the World Cup thing is I'm starting to think the whole preparing for the next major tournament from a team perspective is a bit of a moot thing in cricket, just because even with the women now, there is a kind of major tournament every kind of 18 months, 24 months, which really, from a when you consider how much cricket you end up playing in between that and the different formats, etc., you're like, it's not that long a time. It's not that long a period. I kind of think that, and I was thinking this during the Champions Trophy and all the issues that Brendan McCullum's got with the England side, right? Where I was like, it's really tough because there is only a finite amount of work you can expect a certain team to be able to do, because there is a finite amount of time to prep for any sort of tournament. Obviously, you've got to be mindful of the fact that a tournament is at this time, at this time, at this time. But almost you've kind of got to go, right, we think in this window, you're going to give yourself 18 months to get to a point where we have a window of 3 years where we have an optimum side, right? And in 3 years' time, we can see, right, this player is going to be ready to rotate out the side. So I think I'm kind of, this is like a half-formed idea in my mind. I was like, I don't know how I would try and approach it if I was
Yeah.
involved at planning for how to run this cricket, a cricket team, a international cricket team across genders and across genres of cricket as well.
And for the women, I think especially the tension is because Chamari is going to retire soon, so you want to absolutely maximize it. So you have the end of the career of your greatest ever player, and you want to make the most of it. But at the same time, you probably have the richest pool of talent that you've ever had, right? So there's impetus to invest in the future and concentrate on the now, right? So it's like, do we want to ride out our star and do everything we can to win, or do we want to think about the future? And it's really tricky when you have a player as talismanic as Chamari, right? Like you could if India wanted to sunset Virat Kohli, as great as he is, they would be fine, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, the women don't play as many matches, right? Like, whatever format you take, actually, now this ODI series and T20 series, it's not part of the women's championship. So actually, it's very rare that Sri Lanka get to play series like that. I don't think there were, since the women's championship was introduced, I don't think they've played a series like this where it doesn't count for anything. Technically, it's like, it's an inconsequential series where you do have the opportunity to kind of try out a few players, right? It doesn't happen. And the tri series that's coming also is another one of those opportunities. But at the same time, you're looking at, okay, we have to finalize our kind of playing 15 or 18 for the World Cup based on these two series this year. That's all, right? Because for what it is, you're not going to take whoever is performing the best in domestic cricket into that World Cup, right? If it's not amongst those 15 players, you are going to stick to this kind of, there are those 15 to 20 players who they will be picking from. So that's the struggle, I feel like, as Mark mentioned, right? World Cups are like, we played one last year, we're playing one this year. I think 2026 there's a Champions Trophy scheduled, if I'm not mistaken, in Sri Lanka, I think.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah.
I think it's 26 or 27. If it is 27, then there's a T20 World Cup in 26. Somehow, basically every 18 months, you're going to have a tournament, right? So, but you don't have the bilaterals in between to really build towards that. And I think if you look at Sri Lanka's last cycle, they had like 2 years where they had loads of fixtures because they wanted to build towards that World Cup. But
almost
from that
too much,
point,
right?
Yeah. Technically, they should have had a series like at the end of last year or beginning of this year.
Yeah. Like moving the Ireland series, I feel like if they moved the Ireland series to the beginning of this year, that would have been, but nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
So, okay. Mark, let's shelve the March Madness for next week because we're still in March. What I want to do to flag is I want the viewers to share their favorite big match stories that they've ever seen, and we'll pick a few and read them out and talk about the importance of March Madness, of these big matches to Sri Lankan culture next week. But I want to end because Mark has to go. I want to end with a discussion of Sri Lankan uncles. For those of you following in the Masters Legends League, Sri Lanka has claimed the top spot in pool play. Sangakkara smashed like an amazing century. He scored 100 off of 46 balls or something like that to ensure that their net run rate was ahead of whatever side. So, Mark, as the only actual Sri Lankan uncle in the room, why do Sri Lankan uncles do it better?
Look, right, what I'm going to say might sound derogatory, but it's totally not. I'm first and foremost, I'm a fan of Sri Lankan cricket, and I want Sri Lanka to win every single match we ever play, be it from like under 12s all the way to like the over 85s World Cup, whatever they've got going on. I want us to win at every single level, in every single league going possible, right? But the masterstroke, the genius of this is obviously someone like Kumar Sangakkara shows that, you know, class is a lifetime thing, and that I'm sure in 10 years' time he'll still be hitting centuries for the Masters team. But the real genius and masterstroke behind what Sri Lanka have done here is there's so many players in that squad who are basically just retired or almost like retired just because they want to play Legends cricket. And I am absolutely here for it. It's absolutely brilliant and genius, because not only have we got players who can score runs, but also we've got like we're like the best fielding outfit as well. So because, you know, unlike the other skills, fielding is really dependent on how fit you are and how mobile you are around the park, right? So because of that, I mean, we are doing well. We should be proud of our Masters team. It's a throwback to what Sri Lankan cricket once was, when we were riding the crest of a wave. And, you know, legends. I mean, you look at that Sri Lanka side, you're like, yeah, legend. I don't know. Maybe if I was a fan of another team,
Wait,
if I was
you
an
think
England
these
fan,
guys? Wait. How many of these guys are actual legends, though? Not
all
like
of
I'm
them.
not trying to offend anyone. They're all very
of
good
them.
players.
All of them. If you play international cricket for Sri Lanka,
Sekage
even like
Prasanna is sorry.
legend. Like,
I mean, there are some things you could describe about Prasanna as legendary, but you know, so like I think, and hey, I don't know that we are gaming the system here. Kalu was opening with Sangha, and Kalu is definitely on the sort of older end of this. And England had, you know, they had Owen Morgan. They're not going out there with, you know, nobodies. And Australia's got some big hitters. Watson, Ben Dunk, you know, these guys who are just retired.
Actually,
Nathan
recently I had a conversation with someone, I can't remember who, but he was telling me about this former Indian player, right? Saying that, look, at say you're 35, right? And the door to international cricket is closed. The door to IPL cricket is also basically closed unless you're like a retained player, right? Which doesn't happen at the age of like 35. So what he says is, I might as well retire, play a few Legends leagues. Like there are like 3 or 4, right, around the world.
Yeah.
And they pay pretty well, as far as I know. I think they pay much more than like a LPL gig would pay, right?
Yeah.
Earn my money in my 30s while I'm still like, I'm not in my prime, but I'm not like I can move around, right?
Yeah.
Earn my money, and there is no scrutiny or pressure on me at all, right? Like if Sangakkara got out for 0 in every match he played, no one would give a shit, right? He plays one cover drive and everyone's like, oh my God. It's all for nostalgia, right? You're watching because you want to go back to those times and, you know, see those players and all of that. So like it's a win-win-win for players in their mid-30s who don't have any kind of aspirations to play for the national team anymore, because that's going to be hard work. This is not hard work. You just have to be able to connect with the right people, and you get in, you play a few tournaments, maybe 3-4 years you play, you make a lot of money.
Yeah. And it's fun.
Makes me wish I was a legend.
Yeah. It seems like they're having a lot of fun. Like they're all posting on Instagram.
Because there's no pressure on you, right?
No pressure, right? Yeah, exactly. It's just a hit and giggle kind of thing. And you get to hang out with the boys. Tell your wife, oh, you take care of the kids for 3 weeks. I'm going to go play cricket in whatever. Now, okay, Mark has to go, but I want to ask Mark one final question, because again, he's the expert on this.
Dom, hold on. Can I just, to make my point, I've just got the 11 from the England game the other day where Sangha got his century. So it's Sangha, Kalu, right? They're
legends.
Retired.
They're both legends, no doubt.
Asla Gunaratne, I think he's about 40, like, and I think he was playing first class cricket till last year in Sri Lanka. Possibly might play this year. Thirumanne, who is retired very recently. Upatharanga, again, he was playing first class cricket till very recently. Juvan Mendes, we were talking about him going to a World Cup. Okay,
Prasanna, maybe first class teams that like they
Udana has been playing franchise cricket very recently. Okay. Chaturanga has been playing franchise cricket very recently. Dilruwan Pereira, okay, he's old. Lakmal was playing county cricket last summer. So, I mean, half our side is basically could be playing
I think they're all
a
like
decent level.
late 30s, early 40s, right? Barring a few.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I think that's also like kind of what the other sides are doing. So like Australia, just to give you their
Dom,
side
when you
is
watch that England team, right, you're like, oh my gosh, some of these guys need like they're closer to the retirement home than they are to international cricket. Like that
yeah.
England side is not taking this anywhere near as seriously as we are. I'm not knocking it. I'm saying like Sri Lanka have gone in with
Money in the
exactly the
bank,
right
Mark.
attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm all for this, right?
So who do you
This is
think
the Sri
convinced
Lankan way.
Sangha to play? That's the question. Is who do you think convinced? Because Sangha doesn't need the money in the bank
Yeah.
No,
to do it.
No.
what I've heard is that the money is so big. It's like they,
Oh, really?
like yeah. That's what I've heard. It's if you look at this is a totally stacked league, like, and there's reason
Yeah,
for it.
Sachin is playing, right? He must like
Yeah.
they must be paying him. I mean, I'm
Like,
sure it's also probably gradated, right? So that if you're like if Sachin agrees to play, he probably gets a
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
extra fee. Um,
Because like they can bring in sponsors. Imagine the sponsors that will come in if Sachin is playing your tournament,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
yeah.
Sachin's got your name on his jersey. I mean, people
Yeah.
would pay anything.
Well, yeah, people will be buying the jersey and buying your stuff. So Mark, last question. How come none of these uncles in their late 30s and early 40s are bald? Every like if you look at this is a question I have, and sorry, we're devolving into nonsense here. If you look at like say the 96 team, if you look at the teams in the early 2000s, you had a serious number of bald guys, Arvind De Silva, Sanath Jayasuriya, like everybody was kind of losing a little bit of hair, but these guys all have full heads of hair, and most Sri Lankan men I know tend to go bald, self included.
Right. So I was in Sri Lanka for a few weeks at the end of the year, and I definitely, after a couple of weeks of being there, I was like, do you know what? The diet is so much better over here. I know not all these players live in Sri Lanka the whole time, but I think the diet is actually is quite good because I think it's relatively organic, the food, compared to what me and you are having to put our bodies through in Western Europe and North America. I also think it's much fresher as well. And I think there's, they have sunshine, and potentially I'm going to go out on a limb and say, and I'm like, obviously, stress is something that we all suffer from, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, actually, if you're born and raised a professional cricketer in Sri Lanka, you're kind of maybe a little less stressed in the longer term than you might be if you're some poor Sri
But
Lankan
the
muggle like us,
but
having
the
to
uncle
plow through our lives.
but Sri Lankan living uncles, right? Like Aravinda,
I
like
think they've
Sanath.
just not reached that age yet, Dom. Like they're still
Yeah.
young. I think Upul
Yeah.
Taranga will go bald someday because he's got a
Okay.
widows
Yeah, but
recently.
Estelle, Sri Lankans are going bald. Sri Lankans are off island. Are going like I was basically bald at this point. I can't even remember
Oh, you had
what it
great
was
hair
like
when you were
running.
younger.
Yeah, I did, and then it all just went in like
Yeah.
my like kind of mid to
I
late
mean,
20s, right? Or maybe a
Sanga's
little bit late.
blessed with the hair, but I don't
Yeah,
know how many others are in that
And
same.
and we know Sunga is going to a hairdresser. Come on, let's be real. In the UK, he's
I,
got some fancy.
the real question is how many is there something that we need to do a Murali End investigates into how many Sri Lankan cricketers are going to Turkey, if any, and getting the transplants
The hair.
done? I don't
I
know.
think they are because you look at Sanath. Sanath was
I don't
bald at
think
like
so.
25, though. So Sanath was, yeah. But
Poor
yeah,
Sanath
we'll,
missing out on the
yeah,
Masters.
yeah. He would.
Yeah, he
I mean,
definitely would have been there, right, if he didn't have the job,
Yeah.
right?
you
Oh,
don't think,
not poor him, poor us. Imagine
but
the
Karanga is
glory he
there.
would have
He's the
brought to
chief
us yet again.
selector. He's out playing there. Dilruwan also on the selection panel.
Mm.
So there's
Is
clearly
Ajanta there?
no, but that
But it
would
was
be
his
great. They should
birthday
bring
yesterday, so
Ajanta
happy
in.
birthday,
Yeah,
Ajanta.
they should absolutely bring Ajanta in. That would be great. Okay, all right. We do need to wrap because Mark's got to head off. This has been the Murley End. Thank you for listening, and please comment right back. Send us your big match stories. We're going to talk about them next week, and kind of talk about its importance to Sri Lankan cricket culture. All right. Thanks. Bye.